It is the 200 level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on, I guess, what is a Tuesday afternoon, getting ready for Illinois versus Minnesota, a game that's typically gone well for Bret Bielema, no matter where he's coaching, and a game that would be pretty nice for Illinois to get under their belts after what happened in Eugene, Oregon. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happened Saturday, what we can make of a game like that, which I don't know. There are a few general takeaways, but nothing I think that should be too shocking. Though there were some troubling things we saw on the field, and I think the question will be going into these last four games for Illinois football, can you avoid the slippage that you experienced at the end of the 2022 season? In other words, are these troubling things we saw on the field against Oregon or the second half against Purdue, defensively especially, are these trends? Or is it one really weird half against Purdue and one full game against a legit number one team in the country? It might be that, and it might also be the case that games like this are so matchup dependent, where the Oregon game, if you want to throw that out and ignore it in the context of the four games coming up, you might be smart to do that. At the same time, if we are really to dig down into any skepticism we have going into these next four games, I don't know if it has so much to do with what Illinois has done this season in these first eight games. I think what it is PTSD from 2 years ago when we entered the final four games. In fact, I was trying to think what to title this podcast, and I thought the final four, but then I remember that 2 years ago, I called the podcast before the Michigan State game that very title, the final four. And I got on, we were 7-1 at the time, and I thought, by God, I think we're going 11-1. I really do. Now, that was probably getting a bit overzealous. That Illinois team, as good as the defense was, had an offense that wasn't really going to blow people out, with the exception of probably the Wisconsin game. And they did stretch it a little bit against Nebraska. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, in hindsight, was it that ridiculous? The Michigan win at Ann Arbor, that would have been a crazy prediction, though that was actually the closest of the three losses that you had, and probably the one that you should have rightly had. But I do remember that podcast very well, and hope spring eternal that, we're going to go 11-1. By God, we're going to do it. And you know what? We can slip, let's say at Michigan, but we got the two home games and we got Northwestern. That's 10-2 right there. Well, clearly that didn't happen. So what that does is it informs our, I don't know, attitudes almost going into these final four games, even though I think you could say that they're probably an easier four games than what you faced that time. Well, certifiably they're easier because there's not a Michigan 2022 caliber opponent in these final four. Now, the toughest is coming up on Saturday. By any metric, by the eye test, whatever it may be, by how they're playing right now, the toughest of the four remaining games is this Saturday. So this does present a unique opportunity for Illinois, where if they get this win against Minnesota, then we can talk about 4-0. I mean, we could talk about it now. We're fans. We aren't players. It's not going to be any negative if we just broach the possibility of this team going undefeated the rest of the regular season. I mean, it could happen. There's a non-zero chance that it happens. And in fact, it's not as if it would be shocking given the schedule and the fact that your two road games, one of which is at Wrigley, are against teams that are really slipping and just don't look good right now. And Rutgers is looking like Rutgers of old, not like the somewhat scary Rutgers team that we thought Greg Schiano might have going into this season. But this Saturday is kind of twofold, right? On one hand, it presents a great opportunity to kickstart a potential 4-0 into the season. And I say potential because I'm not going to sit here and predict that. In fact, I don't think 4-0 is probably going to happen. But the other thing I think that it does in the immediate term is it dispels any fears of the negatives at Oregon being some trend that shows that Illinois were somehow, some way flukes in their 6-2 start. Now, would it be fair to even call them flukes if, let's say, they won two out of their last four and they finished 8-4 after a 6-1 start? I don't know, and we're going to broach each potential record and talk about how each of those would make Illini fans probably feel, no matter how you get there. But before we get to the sponsors and what I really wanted to focus on this opening segment, time and time again on this podcast, I've talked about how I don't need Illini football to be great. I don't. I just want them to be good. And if they're good, I'm happy. To me, the 6-2 Illini team, we see it on the field. They aren't great. They aren't. But they're pretty well coached. There's areas in which they are probably overperforming the talent that is on the field. And on the other hand, there's some just straight up really talented players at certain spots. Guys that will play on Sunday. It is a clear upgrade, talent-wise, coaching-wise, schematically, from what you had before with Lovie Smith and Bill Cubit and Tim Beckman. And you could honestly go back most of my life. There are seeds of continuity and consistency here that really give us reason to be excited for the future, but also for the remaining 4 games right here. So I don't think many Illini fans are under any delusion that this, even at 6-1, was a great Illini team. I remember specifically in a chat thread with friends, and they didn't like that we only moved up to 20 after beating Michigan. And in my mind, I thought, maybe it's 6-1 with 3 ranked wins, even though none of those 3 ranked teams look great. Though Nebraska, damn, they almost pull it off at Ohio State. And Michigan, they looked better against Michigan State a week after you beat them. But I felt like 20 was about right. Some fans might have looked at that and thought we were being disrespected. But to me, it's just saying you're good. And you aren't 25th, you're 20th. Oregon raised some of those questions, and now you're 24th. And you know what? I think that's probably about right. Somewhere between 20 and 30. But the difference being that you're winning the close games that you're in, and chances are Saturday is going to be another one of those close games. So good is good enough for me. Now the question is, when you start 6-1, though, does it change your expectations going forward? And it certainly does, right? I think after we get to the sponsors, we'll talk about the possible win-loss records and how each of them will kind of cast either a shadow or really brighten up our overall view of this season, which I think as we sit here today at 6-2, even after that shellacking at Oregon, where they really humbled you and in the process looked really good themselves, I think we're firmly back in a somewhat comfortable place. And I would even argue a more comfortable place for us as a fan base than we were 2 years ago. I mean, just compare and contrast here. 6-2 going into Minnesota at home, entering the month of November. 6-2 compared to 2 years ago, 7-1 entering the month of November with Michigan State coming here. Just like that, 2 years ago, you have 2 straight home games. Winnable. Now, 2 years ago, you had the Big Ten title game kind of looming there. That was a little bit of extra juice. I think you were all the way up to top 15, maybe 13th, or some ridiculous ranking, though it fit that 7-1 team's performance. They looked it. And I do remember distinctly going into that Michigan State game with just unshakable confidence that we were going to win and we were going to win handily. I don't like that. And you might say, well, why wouldn't you like to feel confident in your team? It's not so much I wouldn't like to feel confident, but they were at this weird level that was so uncharted for us as Illini fans, at least had been for a very long time, that it was like putting on a brand new suit or outfit, but you hadn't washed it. You weren't really comfortable in it, right? It didn't feel, if you want to call it imposter syndrome, you can. And sure enough, against Michigan State at 7-1, you drop that game. You don't look good doing it. You look even worse, I felt like, the next week, just out of sorts against Purdue. And all that good mojo is gone. Now, compare and contrast that with how we feel at 6-2 going into this Minnesota game. I'd venture a guess that if you go through the lots on Saturday and you did a straw poll of Illini fans, are we going to beat Minnesota? I think most will say yes, whether that be the early morning mimosas or Bloody Marys kicking in, or in my case, White Russian, or if it's the fact that Minnesota has really struggled against us, and really historically Minnesota, except for, oddly enough, the first decade of the 2000s when they had that just cavalcade of really good running backs, they seem to smoke us every year except 2001. But, I think about the vibes in the lots on Saturday, this Saturday coming up against Minnesota versus 2 years ago. And I kind of prefer this. I prefer hey, okay, we're 6-2. Let's see what happens. It's going to be a tough game. Let's play some Bielema ball. Let's execute and get this win. As opposed to 2 years ago where it was, okay, let's beat them by 3 touchdowns. Let's set ourselves up for the Big Ten title game. Would I rather be playing for a Big Ten title appearance? Of course. But ask yourselves this after the Penn State-Oregon game. Whether it be Big Ten title game or college football playoff, did you in your heart of hearts think that this team was of a caliber to really compete at that level? And in my heart of hearts, I knew they probably weren't. That's why I didn't really broach the college football playoff thing, except in a passing reference or something like that. And I just wanted the season to play out and kind of let it be. I like this spot here where we're 6-2, 4 winnable games coming up. We can talk, will it be Citrus? Maybe we're going back to Tampa. Will it be the Music City Bowl? For me, 9-3 Music City Bowl would be a tremendous outcome because I just would love the idea of driving all the tailgate stuff down to Nashville. I digress. This feels right. In year 4 of Bret Bielema, this feels like a natural progression, whereas 2 years ago still had shades in my mind of the Sugar Bowl and the Rose Bowl year, 01-07, were not out of complete nowhere, but still somewhat surprisingly, you looked potential top 10 good at parts of the season. This team has never looked that way. They've just been good. And because of that, it allows you to compartmentalize some of the bad things. Recognize that this team is just inherently flawed. And then ask yourselves going into these Final Four games against other flawed teams, how many of them are you going to win? And then from a fan's perspective, how many do you need them to win in order to feel really good about this season? So let's talk about that today. After the break, we'll talk about Oregon very briefly, because what's there really to glean from it? But immediately get into the Final Four games. And we put a poll up on Twitter today and asked for responses as well. What's your prediction? What's the toughest and the least tough of the 4 remaining games? And we'll get to all that, and I'll let you know kind of what I think about those 4 as well. But before I get too far ahead of myself, got to remind you the 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers, downtown Champaign. For steak, seafood, and spirits, the best restaurant in Champaign for my money. And I'm not just saying that because they are our sponsor. I feel very privileged to have a classy joint like that associated with the 200 level. But I mentioned last podcast that Ethan, friend of the show, stops by the tailgate. He got his parents a gift card for their anniversary to Hamilton Walkers. They had a great time, and they tried the Old Fashions. They loved it. Told you, best in town. But also a scratch kitchen. So whether it is a bone-in steak or all the way down to their $21 burger, it's made fresh, every single bit of it, within that kitchen, and it tastes that way. You know, I'm not going to call out another restaurant in town, but had dinner at a place locally last week that is considered high quality, and it was fine. You know, it was good. It was good stuff. But I'm telling Kara on the way home, I felt like half of that meal was butter and oil. And I like butter and oil. Don't get me wrong. But it felt like, man, this is just kind of what you get if it's not truly a scratch kitchen. You're getting essentially kind of pre-made stuff that they just throw in the oven or they throw in the microwave. Not the case with Hamilton Walkers. And if you haven't been, please try. And if you have been, remember, it's not just for date nights or formal stuff. You can go there before or after an Illinois basketball or football game, too. Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. Also got to thank Brian Hansen, your State Farm agent at brianismyguy.com. Brian got a shout-out in the News Gazette. Brian, it seems like everybody I know is getting the News Gazette. My buddy Kenton, who went to 30 ballparks, all 30 Major League ballparks this season. Let's not talk about baseball, though, as the Yankees are on the verge of getting embarrassed in the World Series. But Brian, excellent person to work with for insurance. We have our homeowners and auto bundled with State Farm, and Brian takes care of us. That's Brian Hansen, your State Farm agent at brianismyguy.com. Also got to thank Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend at 217-841-4728. Yeah, it's 80 degrees outside right now. My air conditioner is running as we speak. Not for long. The heater needs to be tip-top shape. It has been for us for the last couple weeks when it has had to kick on. Why? Because the last couple years we've had a service plan with Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, and they keep our HVAC system running to perfection. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend at 217-841-4728. And finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Great contractors that can work on almost any home project, and a gallery of their expansive work is online at owenbuildersllc.com. Appreciate Luke and the guys over there who do great work, and the one thing that separates them from a lot of other contracting places, the communication that they have with their clients. Very quick to get back to you, and if you've ever had projects done in your house, you know that's not always the case. It can be a little bit tricky. owenbuildersllc.com. Champagne Showers Podcast Network, appreciate them. Appreciate you. Got a few in the YouTube feed on this Tuesday afternoon. Hello, everybody. And I see some of you have already liked with a thumbs up. If you can just keep hitting that, and helps us get some more subscribers. We're inching closer to like 500 subscribers. So we're finding new people, and of course the book, which is selling every day. There's a few more copies getting sold on Amazon, so I appreciate that. And even had to order some second stocks for Game Day Spirit, Jane Addams Bookstore, and The Lit. I'm going to have to restock them soon, too. So I appreciate that. Every now and then I'll have someone shoot me a text with them buying the book at a local place or what they got delivered from Amazon. So I really do appreciate that. I'm humbled. We'll talk maybe some basketball at the very end of the podcast. No, it wasn't pretty. Yes, it was an exhibition game. Yes, a lot of new toys. I think 2 years ago taught me a lot about, okay, ease into it. Don't get too excited. Of course I'm excited. But don't get too upset if things don't look good first couple months of the season, or there's intermittent bad basketball. And there was on Sunday, though I still think there was enough on the court to suggest that if they figure things out, yeah, there's plenty of reason to be excited. So Saturday, we hunkered down in the garage. It was a beautiful Saturday. So I got my booster shots for the upcoming winter, for flu, COVID. Just as a teacher, you're surrounded by so many people, and also with my family and my parents and some younger nieces. You know, it's just kind of a protective measure. How effective it is, I don't know. But I got it. And the thing is, whenever I get these, I always feel a little bit weird the next day. Not bad, just a little bit off, and then it just gradually kind of wears off. But Saturday, in addition to the game being just kind of weird, I was a little bit zonked out, and I tried to rally. I had me a mixed drink in the first half. Okay, we're getting there, and then, oh, wait, no. This game's going nowhere. So it was very difficult to get invested in that game like I normally would for a 6-1 Illini football team. But if Oregon taught us anything, I think it's a few things. One, Oregon's really good. We can start with that. I'm not excusing Illinois' performance, but I do think it goes without saying that Oregon, 1, will be in the college football playoff. 2, they're probably going to finish the regular season undefeated. And 3, that would give them the number 1 seed in the college football playoff, which could find them in the title game. I mean, you got a quarterback like Dylan Gabriel who just is really good. He can go win his team games, and he's never going to make a mistake. That hurts him. He's not. Skilled players all across the field. The defense was what I was thinking maybe we could exploit, but no. You saw. It is a different breed of athlete, and that's the difference between a top 5 team and a top 25 team. That's a CFP team. Not just a CFP team. There will be teams 9, 10, 11, 12 that are fun CFP teams, but the chances of them beating Oregon, slim to none, right? Second thing we learned. First being Oregon's really good. Second, if Illinois doesn't play well, anyone can beat them. And you might say, well, how does that figure? We're talking about Oregon, who's really, really good. How are you going to make that leap then to, well, that means anybody could beat us? And here's what I mean by that. No facet, offense, defense, or special teams played well. And I'm watching that game thinking that had they played well, I think a prediction like I had, which was, I think, 34-21 or 31-21, could have been more at play. Let's say the defense plays better, and they hold Oregon to 24 points in the first half instead of 35. I mean, that's reasonable, isn't it? And then the offense, while slow going at the beginning, punches in just a couple more of those red zone trips. It just seems like, not to pull the Tim Beckman 17 plays away, but I do think you're probably about 5 or 6 plays away from making that look just a little bit more competitive. But the problem is that neither of your 3 units played well, including just all the way down to your punter, who just didn't look good. And that was the first time Hugh has not looked good all season. He's been phenomenal. And The third thing, and this goes right into a comment here from AO in the chat thread. Your quarterback is struggling at the moment. It's not a 5-alarm fire. Oregon is Oregon. Luke had a bad game against a good defense. But the Michigan game, while Luke was gritty, and he's a gamer, and he had the quarterback sneak, and he had some timely runs, there were a few uncharacteristic misses from him throwing the ball. And that just got worse against Oregon. Now, this will lead to the biggest question coming out of the Oregon game and going into the last four. Because I don't think it's fair to expect any quarterback, maybe not named Dylan Gabriel, to be perfect for an entire season. But Luke was really good for the first 6 games, and he was still pretty damn good against Michigan. He just didn't need him to be great against Michigan, and he was bad against Oregon. What happens is, understandably, as fans, we think, like, is this a trend line? And in the same way that, say, Tommy DeVito, as efficient as he was 2 years ago, cracks were starting to appear in his ability to go downfield, and when teams were really just crowding up in the first 10, 15 yards and realizing that Illinois is not going to challenge them down the field, and it took defenses, it seemed, until late October to figure it out. It started to hamstring your offense a little bit. And I do think there are things on tape that show things you can exploit against Luke. And it's not just the missed passes, which there were a few too many of those against Oregon. It's getting a little bit loose with the ball. The fumble that probably should have been against Purdue that would have lost you that game. But the football gods, and by the way, I know that there was a bad call with Luke wasn't down on that first drive, and then they called him down and went from a 3rd and 5 to a 3rd and 15, and it was a weird bit of plays there. But I got to be honest, even with the missed targeting against Pat Bryant late, I really do think the officials have been on our side this year. I cannot complain, and they probably helped get you that Purdue game. But no, Luke has shown these things in the last few games, as good as he was statistically against Purdue, and as much of a gamer he was against Michigan, that no, he's still a guy figuring some things out at quarterback. And the only thing that worried me, not the only thing, the biggest thing in addition to the on-the-field stuff, was just a little bit of his look at Oregon, a little bit of shaken up, it looked like, from his performance, and thinking, what the hell happened? I used to be, first 6 games, I was cruising, and then, I played 2 defenses full of elite talent, because Michigan still has elite talent, and things slowed down a little bit. Things weren't quite as easy. It's like playing college football 25 on Xbox, and you go from All-American to Heisman mode. It's hard. I'm sure it's actually more difficult in real life. I just realized I tried to compare me playing an Xbox game to Luke trying to play quarterback in the Big Ten. Not trying to make that comp. So AO says here, a little concerned with Altmaier last 2 games. He's been pretty rocky. On Saturday, I felt they should have put him back up in the 4th quarter for some valuable reps. AO, I thought the same thing. I really wanted some Leary action in the 4th quarter. I thought it would have been valuable. You can still pass it around, keep Dixon, keep Elzy out there. I would have taken the guys out sooner, including Pat Bryant, who looks or sounds, according to Bret Bielema, like he will be available, which is a minor miracle and absolutely huge for Saturday's prospects. So we learned Oregon was good. We learned that Illinois can lose any game, and we learned that the quarterback position needs to revert back to what it had been doing in the first 6 games, because a repeat against even a team like Minnesota probably means a loss. Now, I like Luke. I think coming back home, I think playing a Minnesota team that, bear in mind, Luke was really good against them last year and gave you a chance to win, got knocked out on the final drive, and then John Paddock comes in. So there's your twist of the quarterback position. But Luke was really good in that game. It was the defense that allowed Minnesota to go really kind of come back in that. And, yeah, they didn't close out every drive, but for the most part, the offense moved the ball fine against Minnesota. I do think Luke bounces back against Minnesota. And I think if we were to flip this around to some positives from the Oregon game that I do think transposed to this game against Minnesota, I want to start with the run game and the fact that Aiden Lawfrey looks like he has some burst. We saw that in the very first play against Michigan and a couple other times against Michigan where he had some decent gainers. And then against Oregon, same thing. One of which there was that block from Zakari, I guess on the Oregon defensive guy's shoulders, not his back. See, again, the refs are not hurting us this year nearly like they have in the past. But I think Aiden is looking really good. Josh seems to be steady, and it was good to see Valentine get some reps after he was pretty much non-existent, it felt like, against Michigan. So I think the running game is actually starting to find some footing at what I think is the right time. Because if you can ease Luke into it and let him know that we can gain yards with our backs. And with this offensive line now with Brendan Henderson at the right guard. And yeah, he makes occasional mistakes, but I like what I see from him. And the other guys seem to be settling in too. I think that will help ease Luke into a game like Minnesota in a way that you can't really do against Oregon, especially when you fall behind 7-0. So the run game is one positive. Another, and I'm going to point out an individual. And I'm not just saying this because they also updated the rosters on College Football 25, and he's really fun to play in the slot. Colin Dixon seems like a really good football player. And he seems like your slot guy. That's him. It's not Kanari Wilcher. That didn't quite take off earlier this year. Hank Beatty, which, hey, credit to Hank. He's still making some good catches out there, too. We'll call him your number 4. Or I'd say backup slot, and then you got Elsie as your backup wideout, right? But Colin Dixon looks to be a really good player. And you never want to count on a freshman to be some star or be able to shoulder the load offensively, but from a skill position perspective, occasionally that will happen at wide receiver. Not going to compare Colin Dixon to Mikey Dudek, but bear in mind, Mikey Dudek for the first, let's say, 5-6 games that year wasn't lighting the world on fire. From what I recall, maybe the first 4, and I think it was a Purdue game at home midway through his freshman year where he really kicked things into high gear. But Colin Dixon in the month of October started to emerge, and I think we continue to see more and more reps geared towards him. And I think to myself, if you've got Zakari on one wideout position and you got Pat Bryant on the other, if you can find consistency at the slot, you feel great about your pass game. And I'm starting to feel that way despite Luke's struggles. I'm thinking now he's got 3 legit options. And while Minnesota, they are take away happy, and they can get interceptions. But even just turning down the athleticism notch a little bit down from what it was against Oregon, I would like to think that Luke can have a little bit more success and that these wide receivers can create space, which, bear in mind, they still did against Oregon on occasion. Zakari looked really good. Pat was fine, got dinged up late, and Colin Dixon looked good. So first thing that I liked at Oregon, the run game, from what little we saw of it, I think it can play. I really do in these last 4 games. 2, Colin Dixon in the slot. I just love the possibility of having a consistent guy there that can become a primary target in addition to the guys out wide. And the reason that slot position, I think, is so important for a guy like Luke going through what he's going through now, which makes it sound like maybe far more serious than it is, but a few struggles, right? A few midseason struggles. A slot or a tight end is like a safety blanket, or running back kind of leaking out. That's a safety blanket in a passing play if your first or second reads are not there right away. It's nice to know that there is a receiver near you that's going to make the play in case they take Zakari or Pat out of it. So that encourages me. 3, this might sound ludicrous after the Oregon game. I don't think the run defense was as bad as it could have been. It didn't feel like Penn State from a run defense perspective. To me, the bigger issue was tackling in space, often on passing plays. The run defense was not good. It just wasn't a sieve like I thought it might be against Oregon. You might be thinking, Carp, you were really grasping at straws here for a shellacking in Eugene and a defense that stunk. But does that play in your last 4 games when you don't have that freakish Oregon line, which they looked great? They did. There's a reason they beat Ohio State at home. And I know, yes, Ohio State struggled against Nebraska, but the transitive property, I just don't know how much that works in football. So Those are three positives. The first to probably make a little bit more sense. I think your run game is starting to get going. I think that Colin Dixon is a major addition as far as a consistent guy on your offense. And I think the defense, rushing defense, can do okay in these last four. I do. And then if you want to just pick an intangible thing, you just played your worst game. I like Bret Bielema teams after they played their worst game. Now, that doesn't always work out, but take his first year at the helm. Worst game of the year, I think even more than at Virginia, which was early. It was on the road against a pass-happy team in, what was it, game 2? Game 3, I guess, for them. No, to me, the worst game that year was Wisconsin at home in October when, even though they only beat you 28-0, it felt worse than that. Maybe it was 28-3, I forget. But it was an embarrassment. Bye week, Penn State, you remember what happens. 2022. If you think about the loss in Indiana, which was just a mess, and if you had made all the mistakes, actually, I think the games are somewhat similar. Indiana in 2022, you go on the road, you make some mistakes that you wouldn't make a whole lot the rest of the year, and a not-so-good Indiana team 2 years ago, they get the win. If you were to play that same sort of effort against Oregon, if that 2022 team plays the same way against Oregon this last Saturday, and I know that's a weird hypothetical, I don't think the result's all that different. You just played poorly. You made mistakes. You missed blocks. Yeah, you were just kind of out of sorts. You were not right. Well, what did you do after that Indiana game 2 years ago? You came home. Okay, it was Charleston, something like that, or Chattanooga, I'm sorry. And you smoked them, whatever. But then you went on the road to Wisconsin. You built yourselves back up from that disappointment. An exception would be the twofer against Michigan State and Purdue at home. But as I mentioned earlier, I thought the Michigan State game was just a weird example. It wasn't as if you played terribly. I thought Michigan State played well, and you just couldn't quite get your mojo right. There were still good plays in that Illinois-Michigan State game. It was the following week against Purdue where things reached a nadir, I felt like. And what do you do the next week? You damn near beat Michigan on the road. So Bielema has shown with his team's inability to bounce back from bad performances. Hell, take this year. Purdue. What'd you do the next game? Michigan. And you looked a lot better. I think there's something to be said about simplifying. I think playing the likes of a Minnesota allows you to simplify. I will say, though, there is one lingering thing that is a concern going into this game and the rest of the year. And I hate to revisit this, especially when we're just a week removed from the Michigan game, which I know Michigan's offense under the now retired Jack Tuttle, crazy. They weren't good, but Illinois' defense made sure of that. And I gave a lot of credit to Aaron Henry because it was deserved. It was a really good defensive performance. They got their mojo back against Michigan in a big way. And I keep saying mojo, so I'll try to find a different word. I don't want to get to the end of the season and continue to have an overarching question about how viable is it to have Aaron Henry as your defensive coordinator. I would prefer to not find ourselves in that position. I fear that that might be the case no matter what. I don't, and it's easier to say this after you give up, 38 points to Oregon, or whatever the final score was. Was it 38-9? Something like that. Regardless of what the actual damage was, because I've tried to flush it from my memory. During his press conference on Monday, Aaron Henry will come out and say, well, I think that's the best thing that could have happened to us. And it's like, Aaron, I thought 2 weeks ago what happened against Purdue in the second half in overtime was the best thing that could have happened to you guys. Which is it? It shouldn't require failure to get things right. And I understand that's a common motivational tactic. Hey, it was good. We're going to learn from our failures. And even Bret Bielema said it's only a loss if we continue to let it affect us. Or it's only a loss if we don't learn from it. Now, that might sound cliche, but as a teacher, I've grown to learn that that's pretty much true. But Aaron Henry, to me, when we're winning, I can turn a blind eye and say, you know what, maybe this can work. And ultimately, shouldn't be Bret Bielema that's sort of instilling his defense down to whoever his defensive coordinator is, especially a younger defensive coordinator. But I don't think we could go around the lots on Saturday, and if we were to do a confidence meter or a confidence poll on Aaron Henry, that we would find some overwhelming support that, yeah, this is the guy for the long term in that position. Meanwhile, and this is kind of funny, Barry Lunny gets some crap from fans, and you know what? He's not above criticism. I just feel comfortable watching Barry Lunny's offenses. I know what they want to do, I feel like, in year 3. I think I know what they want to do. I think I know the kind of quarterback that he likes to have. And I think he's adaptable, is the word I'm looking for. To give you an example of that, in the Michigan game, they sort of tweaked that offense based on how the defense is playing and how that game was just, the time was whittling down and down and down. I thought Barry called the game in front of him, and I thought that was a pretty impressive thing from him. And he continued to get his team in position to get 6. They didn't always get 6, but there were very few times, other than the 4th and 1 right up the middle, where I looked at Barry's play calling and said, Barry, what are you doing? I think he has settled nicely into his role, and I would be comfortable going forward with him as your offensive coordinator for the long term, because I think that is a functional,
Bret Bielema made the point on Monday
offense
that the biggest recruiting benefit to something like a 6-1 start
is what it does for the NIL. How it gets the donors invested, how it gets fans invested, and they're willing to spend money.
One sec.
All right, yeah. Sorry, a little brain fart there. Radio edit. But I only think that works if the defense is capable of getting stops. I think against Minnesota, despite how good Max Brosmer has played a quarterback and then putting up 48 points against Maryland, I think that you can do that. I think you can keep things in front of you and maybe even get a turnover or two that can really help you take care of that game in the 4th quarter. But I do worry that, let's say you go 8-4 and you win 2 of your last 4, but the defense struggles, and even in a game at Rutgers or something, they give up 28 points, and you're thinking, what are we doing? I don't want to get to that point, but I will say that my confidence in Aaron Henry is just, it's wavering. But there was a way in these last 4 games to respond in this fashion. The Purdue second half was an aberration, and Oregon was Oregon. There was a way to respond to it just like that. Will they? I don't know for sure. But, God, I hope so, because I don't think he's going anywhere. You're likely, I still think likely, going to finish the season with 8 wins and maybe more. And I'll give you my prediction. It's not necessarily 8, but 8 or more wins is right there. I mean, that probably should be done. Anything less than that actually would be a disappointment, I feel like, considering the 6-1 start. So that means that he's going to be back. I would much prefer for it to just fix itself, right? And that we find ourselves going the offseason thinking, yeah, he's fine. And that might be the case. And he might actually turn out to be a really good coordinator. It is year 2. It's an improvement over year 1. So maybe year 3 is an improvement over year 2. It's just a lingering concern. But at the same time, I don't want to overreact based on what Oregon did. It's more the fact that Purdue planted this seed of, because I'll tell you this, I did not have that feeling after Penn State. Yes, I know what Penn State did, but didn't that feel like a Jimmy's and Joe's problem, not an X's and O's? It did to me, at least. And the Purdue game, first half, I mean, Purdue was moving the ball okay. They got some yardage, but you were doing what the defense had done the rest of the year. It was just the complete cluster in the second half, which made you think, what the hell are we doing? And he admitted as much the following Monday. Well, I want to get to a point where on Mondays, we aren't hearing about, I could have done a better job as a play caller. Because while I appreciate the accountability, I prefer on Saturdays you put your team in a position to best succeed so you don't have to apologize or take responsibility on Monday. Just do your job, right? All right, this is from, and this is going to get to, Sean, I see your thing here. Let's get to the last 4 games. So the Minnesota game, if I were to give you a prediction right now, it's funny, I didn't feel great about it Sunday. And I don't know if it's the weather or what. I don't know if it was walking outside today after school and it's 80 degrees, and I'm thinking, you know what, wait a second. That team is going to flush Oregon. They are. They're back at home where they played well all year. They're 5-0 at home. This is Bret Bielema. This is the kind of Big Ten matchup that he tends to excel in. Not the Oregons. There were Wisconsin teams of his back in the 2010s that if they would have went to Eugene and played this Oregon team, would have lost by 3 scores, no problem, right? Good Wisconsin teams. It's just a difference in athleticism. This kind of game against Minnesota is more our speed. And I don't know if you want to call it a moment of clarity or maybe it's just, it's all good. I do feel a win on Saturday, much in the same way that going into Minnesota 2 years ago and the uncertainty around Tommy DeVito and Minnesota being ranked, and you were still, as of yet, unranked, I believe, at that time. There were some questions going into that Minnesota game, an 11 a.m. game on a beautiful, sunny fall afternoon, how you would do. And what you actually did was just went out and played a really good game that wasn't all that dissimilar from what you did against Michigan 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. I feel an effort like that is more at play. And bear in mind, Luke was not fantastic against Michigan. The difference is this. Minnesota will score more than 7 points. The question is, can Illinois get to the 24 or 27 points I think necessary in order to win that game? I think they do. And I do think that the defense bounces back. They keep things in front of them. It sounds like the injuries are not nearly as bad as you thought. And I actually do think Luke has a bounce-back game. If we're focusing on the offense, and I do think that they're going to have to go out and get you a winning score at some point, I think Luke does bounce back. And in my heart of hearts, I do feel like a 27-24 kind of thing, where, yeah, you're going to go in the fourth quarter thinking, oh, boy, but I don't know if this is a trend line that we're seeing against Oregon. I also want to repeat this, though. I'm not putting on the proverbial cut, so to speak, but this is the toughest of the 4 games left. It is. Every metric tells you that. Eye test tells you that. This is the toughest of the 4 games. Michigan State, there's parts of them that worry me because of Childs as a dual-threat quarterback. If he's not turning the ball over willy-nilly, he's pretty damn good for a 19-year-old, and they, early on against Michigan, were just running the ball down Michigan's throat. Now, Michigan figured it out. They were able to key in on that run game. They had enough guys at cornerback, and Jair Hill actually played a pretty good game for Michigan, the former Illini target. And then they imposed their will against Michigan State. They flipped it. And big brother versus little brother, I felt bad for my wife who, as a Spartan, you just so badly want to beat Michigan. And I wanted them to badly beat Michigan too. But I think that showed, hey, Michigan still has some dudes. No, Sharon Moore is not a good coach. I don't think it's going to work up there for them. And it also showed that Michigan State, on any given Saturday, they can be limited offensively, especially. So this is the toughest of the 4 games. And that led me to a question that I asked on Twitter, starting with the poll. The question was this. Sorry, there it is. What will Illini football's record be in their last 4 games? With a follow-up in the replies, and some of you did. Which games are you least confident in going forward? So here are the responses. I did not leave 0-4 out there. That would be absolute disaster. I don't think, since Ron Zook is not your head coach, I'm not as worried about 0-4. So I had 4-0, 3-1, 2-2, 1-3. 1-3, only 3.6% of you selected 1-3. So there's some optimism among the ranks. 2-2, so splitting the last 4, 35.4%. 44.2 said 3-1. And then 16.8 said 4-0. I have waffled. I went back and forth on this, and you might be saying, Carp, how are you going to predict a Minnesota win and not go 4-0? I still think this team slips one more time. And, of course, it'll be more frustrating than Penn State or Oregon because the teams that we're playing are not at that caliber. I think 3-1. And I think they split the home games. I have this weird feeling we're going to lose to Michigan State. And oddly, if you want to take any solace in this, that if we lose to Minnesota, we'll beat Michigan State. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I feel like we split the home games and we go on the road and win both. I'm going 3-1 to factor in what I presume will be one more loss. And here's the deal. At 3-1, I'm ecstatic. At 2-2, I'm still happy. 8-4 for this team. Then probably going to a bowl game that is a little bit more winnable. I mean, 9-3 Citrus versus LSU, or 8-4 Music City versus Arkansas. Which one do you have a better chance of winning? Now, I'll take the guaranteed 9 wins in the regular season before worrying about a potential 9th win in a bowl game. But I'm just saying that, 8-4, I'm still happy. Of course, 7-5 with a 6-1 start. Then you start questioning, well, 7 wins is good, and you're in a bowl game. You start wondering, are we going to get into this second half of the season swoon every year? And I do think that would have a depressing effect on the fan base. Now, 4-0, though 16.8% of you say 4-0. And here's the thing. It can happen. It would be a masterful coaching job if this Illini team goes 10-2. And guess what? I think that overall, with the exception of Saturday being probably just a toss-up, you will be favored in the last 3. So it's possible. This is not a Herculean thing to go 4-0. Here are your responses. From Jacob, most confident Northwestern, least confident Michigan State. I'm with you, Jacob. I don't know what it is about the Spartans. I do think Childs is a really good quarterback. He's just young and sometimes silly. From Jacob, I know lots of people are picking Minnesota as the least confident, but this team seems very angry, and I like that. They will get that bad taste out of their mouth on Saturday. Michigan State has been sneaky good and can hang with Illinois. From what I saw, Jacob, and I know Michigan turned that game, but early on I was like, Michigan State is kicking their ass. Jonathan Smith looks to be just kind of a solid coach and just really the cure for what ailed them with Mel Tucker. And we lost to Mel Tucker. Ugh, I don't want to conjure that up. I'm with you, Jacob. From Ethan, I went into Penn State thinking we were equal with them, and by the end of the game was very angry. Last week, I went into it thinking, why not us? I was never truly angry, but the realization of the talent discrepancy hurt a little more. But there's hope. Sure, we haven't arrived. I think everybody should realize that. That doesn't make the season any less special. I do think we're going to win out. Man, Ethan, if we do, drinks on me, my friend. Ethan continues, if we do drop one, that's okay. The fact that we're here in year 4 already is awesome. In this Big Ten, in this NIL era, Illinois is relevant. Brett's unbeaten streak against PJ worries me the most, but I think the team comes out angry. I'm most confident we're going to get Northwestern a shellacking in Wrigley. Fair. Thanks, Ethan. Probably see you on Saturday. From Dave in New York. Dave, I forget if you're a Yankees fan as well. I'm pretty sure you are. If so, what can you say? It sucks. Dave says, win everything but Rutgers, but that's a coin flip. You know how we talk about the next level of Illinois football to be similarly thought of compared to Wisconsin and Iowa? Those teams beat Minnesota and Sparty at home. Not saying if you lose, same old Illinois, but next step. Dave, I agree. To me, it is a macro statement of, no, this is the tier we're in. Minnesota is perpetual 7-5 tier. You could do worse. There were many years where I would have longed for the Glenn Mason era. 7-5. You start 3-0 against scrubs. You find your way to 7-5. So, Dave, I think that there's something about these 2 home games that if you win both of these home games, I think you got people locked and loaded. Fans are in. I would have a hard time imagining you lose your 2 road games after that. Maybe you split. But I just think winning these 2 home games, going 7-0 at home, and it was talked about on this thread earlier today. When's the last time we went undefeated at home? 2001. Pretty good year, right? So, yeah, pretty cool there. Let's see. Going to the next reply here from Ian. Most confident to least. Wow, this is interesting order, Ian. Rutgers, Michigan State, Northwestern, Minnesota. Least confident in Minnesota. Northwestern there, too. I understand the Northwestern thing just because recent history suggests, right? The fact it's at Wrigley and it's not at their little weird lakefront stadium, and it's cute, I guess, and Ryan Field. I get it, though, Ian. And in a weird way, if you said which one are you most confident in, I would coin flip between Rutgers and Northwestern. Rutgers has nosedived. Is it nose-dove? I forget. Past tense. They look bad again, and I think that they are so just stagnant on offense, but then again, so is Northwestern. They have 2 very bad offenses. Okay, from C. Vance. Minnesota is the toughest game. We're banged up a little bit after a long trip. Feel good about Michigan State after a bye. Rutgers and Northwestern were better then and should prove that on the field. I'm saying 3-1. Brett has never lost to Minnesota, so that gives me confidence they can go 4-0. So C. Vance is going 3.5 and 0.5. He's right. Hedging your bets a little bit, C. Vance, but either outcome would be fantastic. From Banana Champagne, most confident Northwestern. This team can rise to the hyped-up environment. Least, Minnesota. Nobody knows what happens. That always quiet Big Ten school. ESPN has the Illini predicted for the Citrus, so they're expecting some wins. When I see Citrus Banana Champagne, I'm seeing 9-3. A 10-2 non-playoff team might go to the Citrus as well. Boy, what... I don't want to say the Citrus is the dream, but for years I've dreamt of the Citrus. That's why the ReliaQuest Bowl, formerly Outback, was such a thrill. Oh my God, we're in a New Year's Day bowl game in Florida. Always would watch that growing up thinking, I don't need the BCS. I don't need the Sugar Bowl. I don't need the Rose Bowl. That's cool and all, but give me the citrus. From K. Andrew. Between A, my 2-year pass-fail stance of just give me 6, and B, knowing what happened after a 7-1 start in 2022 with a similar regime, I'll dance over a signed contract for 2-2 if that means we can pack it up for the season and start the bowl game development practices now. So K. Andrew would be more than happy with 8-4. I'm going to the Rutgers game with my wife and 5-year-old. If you guarantee me one of those 2 wins will be Rutgers in that contract, I'll mow your lawn and do your laundry until the day of our bowl game. Thank you, K. Andrew. I'm going to keep that in mind. From Robert, we have to remember it's Illinois. They will lose a game they shouldn't, 2-2. That is, I would say, well, Robert, past doesn't always equal precedent. But I think in the present, as we sit here, knowing this Illinois team is flawed and good but not great, I think just that fact alone means that, of course, they could lose a game that they shouldn't. So that's where 2-2 really starts to come into play. Big Phil says most confident Northwestern, least Minnesota. From Rico, even a loss, we saw that Bryant and Franklin can be unlocked in the right matchups. I love the running back room, but a more balanced approach could result in bigger gains. I'm not worried about the snake oil salesman that is PJ Fleck. Thanks, Rico. I hope you're right. From Robert, I'll go 3-1. Brett is turning the tide, but we don't have enough dudes yet to overcome a down performance. We'll have one of those in the last 4. Again, possible. And, I mean, Robert, given this team and the flaws, potentially even likely. This is from ILL, or Outlaw, on Twitter. Most worried about Minnesota after a long road trip. Being underdogs might help the motivation, but a chance at 10 wins should resonate. 10-win Illini teams get remembered forever. They certainly do. A couple things here. First, from College Football Insiders, they do a projection for each matchup. So, for Illinois, Minnesota, based on all these metrics, they have Illinois as a 60% win probability, and the average total here of 25.5 points to 22 for Minnesota. So they have about a 3.5-point win for Illinois. I'm going to look at some other ones here for the rest of the year. Michigan State as the away team, Illinois at home. They have Illinois with a 67% chance to win, beating Michigan State 27-20. This, by the way, again, is collegefootballinsiders.com. When you punch in Illinois at Rutgers, they like it even more. They have Illinois as a little bit less than the home game against Michigan State, but still 65% chance to win, beating Rutgers 27-22. And then finally, Illinois, and this says away and home, even though it's more neutral site, but nonetheless, Illinois at Northwestern. They would have Illinois 70% chance to win, beating Northwestern 27-20. So that is what College Football Insiders has based on their projections. Now, last thing here, and it looks like I might have a couple more replies. Nope, I got Jacob in there, so I'm good. This is from Kelly Ford Ratings, and they do the projections for the rest of the year. They have Illinois at a 74% chance to get to 5 conference wins, which would be 8 wins in the year. They have Illinois at a 36% chance to get to 6 conference wins, which would be 9. They have an 8% chance for Illinois to get to 10 total wins, which would be 7-2 in the conference. That would be remarkable. They have Illinois as a 41% chance to beat Minnesota at home. They like Minnesota in these metrics, especially their defense. They say is the 15th best in the country. Offense, 64th. Here's the thing, though, I want to watch. Special teams for Minnesota, 131. Illinois, meanwhile, 2. Second best special teams in the country, according to Kelly Ford Ratings. Michigan State, they have Illinois as a 57% chance to win. At Rutgers, 49%. Northwestern at Wrigley, 66%. Here is the thing that I'm noticing the most. With these offenses coming up that you're facing, Oregon, remember, was, I'll go look up theirs in just a second. Minnesota's offense, 64th, according to Kelly Ford Ratings. Michigan State, 95th. Rutgers, 77th. Northwestern, 122. By comparison, you're looking at an Oregon team. Well, let's see. First off, you have Penn State was the 13th best offense in the country. Oregon, the 2nd. They schooled you. So are we going to find out on Saturday against Minnesota that, yeah, Oregon's just that freaking good? It's a possibility. And I'd be okay with that. I want to win Saturday. I think they get it done. And, man, what a run of weather we've had at these games, too. It's just going to be a perfect Saturday, 64 and sunny. Not that windy. The leaves starting to turn. Just a perfect day. And I love the 11 a.m. tailgate because you get the pre- and the post-game tailgate, which is especially sweet if you get the win. I just feel like this is sort of the kind of game that you kind of get right. It's a Bret Bielema game in so many ways. All right, so this is from AO. Based on talent only, we're up to par with everyone except Michigan State. They seem to have 4-star players all over. It's weird, AO. They look good. They look big and strong, and that's why that game I actually am still least confident in for just intangible reasons. But, hey, you beat Minnesota, and then, yes, you can dream about 4-0. And I don't think that's unlikely. I know that Vegas has Minnesota as about a 3-point favorite, and that line is set by bookies knowing they'll get action on both sides. They're going off of what happened at Oregon, knowing that people will react to that, and they're going off Minnesota's 48-10 shellacking of Maryland. It was impressive. As bad as Maryland is, it was impressive. But I do want to bring to your attention the last 3 opponents that Minnesota's played are USC, UCLA, and the aforementioned Maryland. Now, UCLA stinks. It took everything for Minnesota to win at UCLA. USC at home, big win at the time, but USC seems to be floundering. The week before that, Michigan had Minnesota dead to rights. A late rally by Minnesota, but Michigan still put up 27 points. That's where I think you can put up 27 at home and get the win. From Brad P., this needs to be the Malik Elzy game. Doubt Bryant plays no matter what Bielema says this week. I was wondering that, Brad, but man, it seems like if you're going to say he passed concussion protocol as opposed to just being a little bit evasive about it, maybe you're just trying to make the other team prepare for it, but I think the emergence of Dixon in the slot and the idea that Elzy could get more snaps on the outside, even without Bryant, I still think you find a way, but Bryant certainly makes you feel a lot better if he's out there. And if the secondary is healthy, and it sounds like they are for the most part. So that's what we'll go with until we wake up Saturday morning, an injury report comes across, and it's like, uh-oh. We will find out more Thursday, though, from a press conference or post-practice press session with Bielema. So, or maybe we won't. But I think they have to be a little bit more forthcoming with injuries now. All right, well, thank you for the YouTube folks tuning in on this Thursday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon into evening. I appreciate it. Appreciate you listening wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate, of course, Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign for steak, seafood, and spirits. Go there before the game, after the game, 11 a.m. You probably won't be able to go there for breakfast. I don't think they're open, but it would be a great spot Saturday after Illinois hopefully beats Minnesota to enjoy an early fall meal. Scratch Kitchen, bone-in steak is what I always get, along with family-style sides of French fries, the steak fries, excuse me. I love having just traditional steak fries with my steak and their asparagus. I get the old-fashioned, of course, 2 if I'm feeling lucky. Great stuff. They mix it with Buffalo Trace bourbon, which is a great bourbon to use for an old-fashioned. That's Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com. For life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Owen Builders LLC online at owenbuildersllc.com. Check out a wide range of home improvement projects they can work on at owenbuildersllc.com. And finally, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728 and get your furnace check scheduled today. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Appreciate them. And if you're in the lots on Saturday, stop by Lot 31. You'll see the flag, 50-yard line back by Oak Street. Let's get the win. 7-2 would feel great and would be a strong start to the final 4 games of the year. I think we got a good team. It's time to go out there and start feeling good about ourselves again, because a team like Oregon will always make you call things into question. It's time to answer some of those questions. And against a team like Minnesota and Bret Bielema's historical success against them, I think we can do just that. All right, everybody. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you on Sunday. It is the 200 level. All right, thanks, YouTube. Take care, everybody.